Welcome to Amidon Planet. I am your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me in this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on the podcast, we're talking about a quest that I had with some colleagues to learn how to teach better. And the culminating, artifact of that quest was an article that we wrote that came out in June. It's called, Are We Preparing Agents of Change or Instruments of Inequity? Teaching Toward Antiracist Mathematics Teacher Education. This was featured in the Mathematics Teacher Educator journal, which is a partnered journal between the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, or NCTM, which you'll hear us say over and over again throughout the episode, and the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators, AMTE. So, Mathematics Teacher Educator, it's about teachers of math teachers. What the work that they do to teach math teachers, and then they publish it in the Math Teacher Educator journal. So very self-explanatory journals, but a lot of acronyms and different things. A lot of times when I talk about what I do, I teach teachers how to teach, and that's kind of weird because a lot of people just want to say that I teach mathematics, and I don't teach mathematics. I teach math teacher education. And so this is a journey about figuring out how to do that better. And over the course of my time as a math teacher educator, I was introduced to this idea of anti-racist teaching, or being an anti-racist. And the famous book by Ibram X. Kendi, I referenced it on this podcast several times, How to Be an Anti-Racist, came during the pandemic. I was reading that book, and there was a book club here on campus here at the University of Mississippi that I was a part of, a virtual book club, and we had a chance to do some discussions. Had a chance to talk about that book with Linda Angadi on a previous episode of the podcast. We'll put that episode in the show notes. But then that idea of being an anti-racist, right? And so, again, to review about anti-racism, you'd think about, if you're a racist, that's bad, right? You're actively moving towards treating people differently based off of race, right? That's bad. Being a non-racist means you might hear someone say, well, I don't see color, I treat everyone the same. Those sorts of things that you might hear from someone where, that idea that you don't see something that's a part of someone's identity. And then also too, not treating that there's things in this world that have and are actively racist, and then to think about how do we move against that, right? And so this idea of being anti-racist is something that has been kind of developing. Well, what does that look like? That's my question. It's whenever I see something, if it's about teaching math for social justice, or I talk about teaching math as agape, my question is, what does that look like? And how do you learn how to do it? And something that we did, and we didn't initially label it as, thinking about it as anti-racist mathematics teacher education, but eventually kind of come to think maybe this is a step towards it, is this project that we're going to talk about in this episode. So, and I think it's important to tell the story of it, and so that's what we're going to get into in this episode. I'm going to be talking about it with my colleagues, Anne Marie Marshall and Becky Smith. Both have been a part of my life for a long time. And so we're going to talk about that, talk about the arc of this project, all the different iterations of it, how it came to be. And I think it is important to tell these stories. I remember when I was a grad student at the University of Wisconsin, I went to this talk by Dr. Michael Olnick. I believe he's a professor emeritus now at the University of Wisconsin in the School of Education. And Michael Olnick told the story of an article, and it was the most, it sounded like an Indiana Jones movie with all the different iterations, all the different things that you had to go to get this thing published. And I thought, holy cow, how can you do that? And then I think about all the different, now I've been at this in my current position for 12 years, and I think about all the different stories I have that are similar, if not worse, than Michael Olnick's story, where I'm almost scared to share it with our new faculty members because I don't want them to get intimidated. Hey, I got to get tenure in 6 years, and you're talking about 8 years with an article or 8 years on a project. And yeah, sometimes it is like that, where you have to like go through the iterations, and in thinking specifically about this project and then this culminating product of the article, like it took a long time. And also thinking about all the different iterations, all the growing that we went through as a research group and as teacher educators and just as teachers or as people, it needed that time. It's like a slow cooker, right? This isn't an Instant Pot. This is a slow cooker, So thinking about that and thinking about all the different growth we had to go through. Also, too, but possibly very close to the time that this podcast will be published, there's going to be an episode of the Math Teacher Educator podcast, which is associated with the journal, where we talk strictly about the article. And I'll post a link to that. So if you're looking for all sorts of content around this article, you'll get this episode and you'll get that episode. I mean, man, your weekend plans are set. So you're going to have both those things. And also, too, if you're looking for the module, again, we talk about the module, and the module, we put a lot of work and time into it. No, we don't say that this is the best thing to do, that this is an exemplar, but it is work that was done towards this idea of anti-racist mathematics teacher education. All right. So we're trying, right? And we talk about this idea of critical grace as well in trying to take steps towards this thing, right? And that's why we put things out there. That's why we publish things, right? We publish things so that ideas can be put out into the world. People can say, hey, I can do something better. And we took people's work and tried to do some iterations off of it. And we're all building off each other, So we talk about Vygotsky and zone of proximal development. What can you do with help? And we did something with help, and now maybe we're helping someone else take those next steps. So there'll be links to the module in the show notes as well. That's all sorts of different, links. The show notes will be very helpful for this episode. Also, too, we're going to mention a lot of different opportunities and things. And so, like, we'll talk about STAR, and we're also going to talk about complex instruction, lots of different things. So, hey, check out the show notes. So we'll see if we can get you some things there. All right. So, excited to share this. Been, ever since we published this in June, and knowing it was going to come out, wanted to do this episode. And so glad get a chance to talk with my good friends, Becky and Anne-Marie. So without further delay, here's my conversation with Anne-Marie Marshall and Becky Smith on our article in the Mathematics Teacher Educator, Are We Preparing Agents of Change or Instruments of Inequity, Teaching Toward Anti-Racist Mathematics Teacher Education? All right, bam! Welcome to Amazon Planet. That would be Becky Smith and Anne-Marie Marshall. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming today. Becky, how are you?
I'm doing great. And you?
I am well. Anne-Marie, how are you?
Good. You said BAM. I'm like, is this Emerald? Are we on the cooking channel? Or are we on Amazon Planet?
Short story. I like using acronym. My wife's name is Katie, so I use KT and if I'm sending her an email. But then, for Becky and Anne-Marie, I was like, bam, there we go. So whenever we would have conversations or have a research meeting or whatever, I would always just say BAMM. So, and also too, but connecting back to Emerald, his daughter goes to the University of Mississippi. So we see him on campus. I haven't seen him personally, but people have. And that is the full circle of life. Hakuna Matata. Here we go. All right. So we're here to talk about work that we have done that we've done over a long time. And it finally got published. And I'm going to read the article title because I want to make sure, because we've presented on this as well. Are we preparing agents of change or instruments of inequity, teaching toward anti-racist mathematics teacher education? And this is longer story or longer a bunch of work behind it. We'll get into that story in just a second. But I'm just glad that you all agreed to come on to talk about it, because I think there's some stories and some learnings we could share about this work. Thinking about coming into this work, and we'll talk about the story in just a second. Like, what are some initial reactions about finally getting the article out?
Well, I think that, anyone who does this work,
Relief.
there's relief, first of all, finally. Yeah, and then second, you're going, wow, I'm really that old. We started this work in what year? But just really grateful that we had an opportunity to dig in and learn from each other, and that we can share in a sort of a broader audience this stuff that we've been thinking about and working on for such a long time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would definitely say I'm grateful as well. And as we share, I definitely was new to teacher education and new to research. And this was a kind of a good introduction for me and you guys as coming alongside me and letting me be a part of this. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah. So this is a gratitude, an episode of gratitude. And again, thanks for coming on and let's get into it a little bit. So again, this article is kind of like the culminating piece at this point in time, but we started this, way back when, and I went to it was a retreat, I guess, at Battle Creek, Michigan. It was at the Kellogg Mansion. So Frosted Flakes money paid for the place, but it was with a bunch of math ed researchers, and one of the people there was Dan Beatty. And Dan and I can remember in my head walking down a path, and he was talking about this article that he had written in 2013, Access to Mathematics, a Possessive Investment in Whiteness in Curriculum Inquiry, the journal Curriculum Inquiry. And he was talking about taking these two pieces of data. One was the last course taken in high school, broken down by race and ethnicity, and then combine that with another set of data about what's the last course. If you're a predictive factor of whatever your last course in high school was for mathematics, what you would expect to make 10 years down the line, right? And then there was some discrepancies in the data, right? It was not representative, it was disproportionate, right? The representations of what courses people took in it according to that, the racial and ethnic breakdown. And so he found some interesting in that, hey, when we're talking about what courses people are in, what the pathways that lead people to take certain courses, there's a monetary value tied in with that. And I think, Emery, I think this is where you can. I was like, I was asking Dan, hey, are you going to do anything else with this data? You're like, I think I'm done with it. I wrote this article. It's out there. And I'm like, I think there's something with this data, to do a teaching for social justice sort of angle on it, to use this data as to talk about our importance as teachers. And that was kind of it. And then that was kind of an idea ruminated in my head. And then that I think led to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, do you remember when we looped in and started talking about this?
Yeah. And I think it's an important sort of aspect of the story that you and I had kind of run into each other at NCTM. And this piece was on your mind. And so we started having some conversations about it. But just to kind of set the stage there, the broader story of how the three of us kind of came to work together. Joel, you and I met at STAR.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, and I'm bringing this up because I think it's important for maybe newer scholars or younger scholars as they think about how do I get linked in and how do I get connected and how do I work with folks and collaborate on projects. But you and I met at STAR, which was an incredible opportunity to meet new faculty in math education. And because of STAR, we had a relationship. And so when we saw each other at NCTM, it was like, hey, what are you working on? What are you doing? And I think for me, being really the only elementary math educator at the institution I was at the time, and which can sometimes feel isolating and lonely, right? Who do I collaborate with? I don't know how I reach out to people at institutions. I don't know, how do I start to work? It was great that I had that connection. And then also specifically for folks who are doing critical work in math education, it could even feel even more isolating because you're not sure of other folks in the field who you might be able to collaborate with. So anyways, that's a little plug for STAR.
No, good one.
And just think like how important that was in the evolution of this story. And then even as you think about you asking Becky to join at the time she was a doc student, and how important it is for, faculty to say, hey, let me share this experience and really sort of pay it forward and bring on doc students to get involved in projects so they get that experience in their journey. So anyways, all that to say, I think it's a great example of like collaboration and the importance of kind of making connections and supporting others across the field.
Real quick, I'm going to put you on the spot, Anne-Marie, and I'm going to do it too. Who's one faculty member that you can point to? So if we're thinking about paying it forward, we'll get Becky in here in a second. Who is a faculty member or a couple of faculty members who looped you in on things? I can think of Amy Ellis for me at the University of Wisconsin. She showed me what it was like to work on a big project. I did some data collection for some exponential learning trajectory sort of work. And it was like how she took this idea, translated into a research project and put it out there. And I was like, this is what it's like to work on a project where you're trying to poke at and investigate an idea. And I was like, it was cool to be a part of that. And like to be in on conversations where, all right, how do we, there's some tangible things we need to make some project, but then how are we going to research this? How are we going to collect the data? That sort of thing. I don't know. Who's that for you?
Yeah, I would say two folks. One, Dr. Deanne Hinker at UW Milwaukee, who she's why I went to get my PhD, right? Like that's really, that's the honest truth. I'd never dreamed of that. And then she just sort of slid this brochure and was like, this is what you should be doing next. And then there's lots of examples throughout my career about how she has really opened doors and things. And then the other is Dan Chazen, where I went to Maryland. So yeah, he and for both of them, it's not just the connections and the opportunities, but man, they believed in me, both of them, every step of the way. And so just feeling like I had people in the field who felt like giants who thought I could do good work goes a long way, right?
They want to learn more about your ideas. And that was the thing too. When I was doing my dissertation, Amy she wasn't on my committee, but she was always like, all right, let's hear what you're going to do. Let's hear it. Tell me some things. I'm going to poke some holes in it and out of love, right? Out of love and care. Yeah. So it was awesome. Yeah. All right, Becky, how did you get involved in this? Or when did we approach you?
I was a doc student. I guess it was maybe my third of 5 years at the University of Mississippi when I was there. And I truly was very new to educational research. I wanted to get my doctorate degree because I wanted to teach future teachers. And so my mind was very much in a practitioner mode, if you would, that I wanted to be a good practitioner and I wanted to pass along, knowledge of how to be a great teacher in the classroom. And that's very important. And so that strategy was kind of what was my driving force at the beginning. And it wasn't until I partnered with Joel and then subsequently Anne-Marie that I realized that there was so much more there in educational research, especially with taking a critical stance was concerned. And for me, I'd come from a very impoverished school district, both as a student and then also as a teacher in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. And so I had this firsthand view of inequities, but I didn't have the voice. I didn't have the vocabulary or the substance behind it to make a difference. I just knew that there were inequities, and I knew that I was, working myself silly in a classroom trying to move forward. But I didn't realize there was this wealth of research that existed that looked at academic inequities and that looked at taking a critical stance and addressing controversial issues or talking about hard things. And you guys helped me give a voice to that. So even though I had those lived experiences, I didn't have it framed in such a way as an educational researcher or thinking I can do something to move this work forward. And so for you guys, y'all were definitely a mentor to me and in my teaching, but mostly in my research, because that was the part of being the doc student that was new to me. And Joel, I'm going to tell this one on you, and told him this only after I graduated. But my very first encounter with him was an educational research, kind of a forum that he was tasked with, kind of calling some doc students to find their research agenda and, weekly meet up to find out where you are, what are you doing to move forward. And I walk in, this young, fresh practitioner type teacher, not a researcher. And my first encounter with him, I left and I sobbed crying because I felt so inadequate. And I was like, I don't know what to do. But then I realized very quickly that he had my best interests at heart. And he became that person that was willing to have really hard conversations with me, hold my feet to the fire, or call me out when I messed up or didn't fulfill my end of the bargain or something. And so he became very much a encourager to me, although I started the conversation with a little bit of intimidation factor. I realized quickly that was not the case. So there you go. Sorry, Joel.
Joel, you're so scary.
You made me cry.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry.
No, it was very meaningful, because it was that moment that I realized that that grad school was going to be harder than I thought, which is a good thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that I had to step up to the plate and learn new things and do hard things. I tell my kids all the time, we do hard things. And I had to internalize that and be willing to put forth that same effort in my own life professionally.
Yeah. I think, Anne-Marie and I both got exposed, because Anne-Marie, you were, I keep forgetting, what's the collaboration of doctoral students from Audis that you're a part of, or
colleges?
No. So I had a chance to interact with DIME, the Diversity in Math Education.
Mac Mattel, we were called.
Mac Mattel. Yeah.
We had NSF. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an NSF funded thing around Wisconsin, Berkeley, and UCLA. And I wasn't a part of it. I just was a groupie of it. But I got to interact and do a couple things because they were doing, and those were the conversations that were constantly happening, Becky. And so being able to then bring that with me and all of that was out of love too. It's like, ooh, I better get going. Right. I care about my teaching, but what are you doing to share it beyond you? Right. So that your impact. That's the whole point about going to get a doctorate.
You need people in your life that call you to higher things. You don't need to always be surrounded with people that smile and pat you on the back and say, you're doing great. Because that's fine. But you need people in your life that call you to bigger things and to higher work and to high standards. And you were that for me. And I appreciate it.
Well, and I'll take it as a positive. There you go. All right. So bam.
Every
there
time.
It is.
Bam.
That's right. So, why did this article take so long to write? So we talk about, I think if I look at it, I think we started, in maybe even 2013, but it was early. I think we wrote about it, but I can't remember. It was 2015, maybe something around there. 2014, 2015, maybe, but it's been a while. It's been a while. And just, I know that Becky, you were going to be teaching a math methods course, alongside of, I was teaching the same one. Anne-Marie was also teaching a series, two math methods courses. And we're like, hey, let's make something. Let's make something that we can then do within our courses. And again, it was kind of a practitioner focus, but then thinking about, well, what do we learn from this process? But going into that, why did it take so long to write this piece?
Well, I think a few things, right? One, we didn't know what we were going to do in the beginning. And I actually think that proved to be a good thing, that time and space to just let stuff marinate and figure out what it is that we really wanted to do. And then we needed time to create it and reflect on it and refine it. And we did that a few cycles, right? Yeah. I think we several semesters we did that. And, I think in terms of logistics, having, being in two separate places. So me being in the Bronx and the two of y'all being in Mississippi, while we were, really regular with our weekly research meetings, we never had like large chunks of time to be together where you might, if you worked at the same institution. So, so I think that actually, did play a factor.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those are a couple things off the top of my head.
Well, and I even think the quantity of data that we had, there was so much information there, and that initial swipe through it was a little all over the place, and it took us a few swipes through the data and the codes to say, there's a story here, like there's a message to be told. We knew there was a message to be told, but there were so many components, and that narrowing of it, I think, to get it down to a concise message. And I still think there's some messages that are still left to be told from what we learned, that I feel like this is a large chunk of it, but I don't think this is the sum total of the messages we learned, both as teachers and about our students, but also about collaboration and peer interaction among the three of us. I still think there's a lot to be told there. So I think there was just a lot to wade through to narrow that message, and that took a minute.
Yeah, I think too, there was something with regards to trying, like, we put ourselves out there several times in some conferences and whatnot to tell versions of or slices of the story. And so, like, I'm looking back in 2017, we had a session called Moving Perspective Math Teachers from Instruments of Inequity Towards Agents of Change. That's what, hey, not bad. But thinking like every time we did that, we got feedback on what we were doing. And so I guess that's a kind of a push too. And to keep putting your ideas out there so they can be refined, right? Otherwise, you're just holding this precious pet that, you never show anyone. And then, who's going to, if no one ever takes a look at it outside of us, then what's the point, right? And because again, the whole point is to do things in order to share and disseminate them. And so I think that took a while. And then, in the midst of probably when we were getting close to putting something out there, a pandemic happened,
Yeah.
That was,
well, and two of the three of us relocated and, changed universities and changed positions, but we still kept that connection and still kept that accountability across the three of us. But there were a lot of changes that happened during the course of the module and sharing the information and getting the piece out there.
Well, and I think and I said the pandemic, I meant the dual pandemic, right? We were talking about the, at the same time as COVID's happening, we're talking about, massive, issues of racial injustice happening all over the country. And not that it just started, but it was the continuation or the highlight or you've seen, just stuff that made us pause and be like, well, what are we doing here? Right? What is the story that we're trying to, going back to story, like, what is the story of this, that we're trying to tell with regards to what is this thing? Yeah, that was the comeback. What is this thing?
Well, and I think in addition to what is the story, coming sort of like reflecting back on both pandemics, it almost gave us a sense of urgency that this is an important story to tell and this work is really critical, right? So you sort of like, I think we knew that going in, but then sort of reliving a time when there was so much, so many kind of acts of violence against Black and Brown people. And, it created this level of we need to do this and we actually need to think about, our purpose. So I remember we decided to kind of rewrite parts of the introduction because we were just like, we need to take a little bit of a different stance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess also another reason why it took longer, right, is we had some very patient and very loving editors, I think, for MTE, the Mathematics Teacher Educator Journal, that kept working with us. That thought that there's something important here that need to get out, and kept working with us on getting out as well. So big appreciation there. I was just having a conversation again for anyone that's looking to get papers out there. I think one thing that I've figured out in my years is just to be stubborn. And then also a rejection is just giving you a pathway to acceptance. So it might not work in like wedding proposals, but it might work in writing proposals here where, hey, this is why this paper doesn't work here. Oh, and if you can stand those changes that they're asking you to make, well, now you've got a pathway towards, maybe it's not a reject anymore. Maybe it's an accept with some revisions, or maybe, you keep moving forward with that. And so, and also too, if someone's willing to give you feedback, that also means that they think that there's something there too. I've seen so many different places where, you don't get any feedback and like, okay, that's probably it's not a good thing. But versus other places where they give you a little bit of feedback, it could be like, that's an invitation to keep working on it as well. If you're willing to persevere through that. So, all right. Anything else we need to do to set the stage before we talk about some lessons learned in this piece?
Describing the module, maybe, because that would kind of be our own rant, was describing the module, perhaps.
Well, so basically what we had was a series of, modules. Do you want to start? You want to kick that off, Becky? Do you want to start describing?
I can. It was the three of us were each teaching math methods classes, and it was a way, like Joel mentioned earlier, we began with this Dan Beatty article that was rich with data, and we started it with just a complex math instruction task where we had our students just mathematically look at decimals, percents, and fractions based on this unidentified data set. And so we removed all context from the data and just gave them the numbers. And so we had them make some mathematical noticings about that data. And then fast forward, we then contextualize the data and say, hey, this is what you're actually looking at is a breakdown of students in their last math class that they took based on ethnicity. And so there were some really profound moments that we learned that, where the data looked in a certain way without the context didn't necessarily make sense. But then when you contextualize it and they have to say, oh, only this small percentage of Native American students had access to higher level mathematics compared to their white counterparts, and what level of mathematics they had access to. It opened the door for our students to begin those difficult conversations. So that was our first part of the module, was the data piece. You guys want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the big thing was, that hidden sort of nature behind the data, so that when they saw and making sense of the data without the context versus making sense of the data with the context, there was this kind of like uncomfortable nature around, this is one thing I noticed. Like, the big one that I always got was 50%, and we use this example in the article, but that 50% of the grid that they colored was either red or gray. And then when they came out with it, it was like, 50% of students who identified as Alaskan, Inuit, or Native American took either calculus or no math, right? And so it's like, but then it was 48 gray, which was the no math, and 2 of them were the red, which was calculus. And so it was like, but that doesn't sound right, right? They would say like, but that doesn't sound right. And like, it was true, but it didn't sound right. And so that was interesting to see them start to struggle with that. And so that idea of picturing inequity, that's kind of what we called that one. Yeah, good. That's what I had to remember from it.
And then we also did a lesson where we had them analyze their own mathematics history, their own math history, where they had been asked to write autobiographical narratives about their own life and what brought them thus far, or what contributed to their feelings or emotions associated with math history. And we asked them, if I'm recalling correctly, we gave them 2 color highlighters. When was this positive? When was this negative? And had to go through and analyze those episodes in their life and realize what were those contributing factors. And at the end of it, there was it kind of rolled across each classroom differently, but there was always this moment of, wow, my teachers really played an important part in who I am and how I feel about math right now. And so it led to this discussion of teachers matter, which, we seem is very obvious, but when they see that in their own stories and they realize how one teacher may have steered them in this particular direction, whereas another teacher may have changed the trajectory completely, that's a powerful piece for them to see in their own stories.
One thing that we don't get into in the article, but I think is really interesting things surfaced from the data, is the fact that, I at the time was working at Lehman, which is a Hispanic serving institution. And of course, the two of you at the time were both at University of Mississippi, and so, which is a PWI. Right. So the population of students that we were collecting data from were very different. And so the interesting thing is that we saw in some places a lot of similarities when they talked about their math histories, when they thought about some of the activities that we're doing. And then in other places, we noticed a lot of differences. Right. And so even thinking about looking at the initial data set, a lot of the students that I was working with went to schools where they weren't even offered calculus, or they didn't have some of the classes that, a lot of white students might have had access to. So that's a part of the data we have yet to sort of even kind of go back to, and I think would be really interesting.
Well, and that might feed back into why it took so long. Because again, all the different perspectives we could have taken in doing this work, and they're like we try to take them all at times, And so that was something that was, again, interesting, but then something that we did. It was one of the things, like when you come down to like, how do you tell it for this piece? It was like, okay, well, that's not the angle that we're going to take here. So.
Well, it all feels important, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're in the thick of it, you're like, oh, well, we certainly have to do this. We certainly have to do that. Now it's a book and it's not an article. But
yeah, exactly. And then anything. So we had the picturing inequity, picturing what equity could be. We had the what now, or teachers matter, and then what now. And that was something that I think you came up with, Becky, was like kind of the end cap, where the people tell their stories, and then we kind of give them ideas on what they could do with regards to teaching math for and about social justice. But then you came up with an end cap kind of to the whole experience, where it was like not the math history, but math future. Can you share that piece?
Absolutely. And that's one of the pieces that I've actually kept, and still, fast forward how many years later, I still do, is that now that they've walked through this, and now we've seen inequities, and now we've looked at the power that teachers have played. And we had several very strategic readings about how to use social justice context in the math class, the teaching with, for, and about social justice. And then we wanted them to say, okay, are they taking any of this with them? Or is this going to make a difference going forward? And so we had them do a final narrative of their math future. And we didn't give as many parameters on the math future, just kind of, hey, what are you taking with you? What do you want to have in your class going forward? And it's always interesting to hear what components stood out to those students and what they said. And I remember even like in our data analysis, there were some things that been personally reflective that they would say that, oh, though it's not quite how we meant that, and so we'd have to kind of be very reflective and willing to go back and revise our own way of presenting things, or our own way of talking about things. With that math future, I think gives them a place to culminate, and even maybe just journal to think ahead, like, this is how I want to be as a teacher. This is my goal in my future classroom. This is what I want.
Yeah. Which is a nice thing to be thinking about. Like, okay, now what's my vision going forward? What are some tangible things I could do? What are some things that I might have learned to put forth in there? So, I guess the thing that we struggled with, and eventually we got around, was not to say, hey, we designed something awesome. Everyone needs to do it. Right. I think that was the thing. Like, I think we did think it was good. And as we refined it, I think it got better, but I think we really struggled with saying like, this is the best. You gotta do it. Like, I think we just struggled with that because we designed it thinking about who the students we were working with, and how do we then position it as something, but we still want to share. And so we initially were talking about sharing what are the things people learned within this during the semester, like, and we could say, well, is that directly from the module? Like all these sorts of struggles going on. And eventually we came up with these things where some tenets that we just wanted to enact, or we were kind of holding true, and then saying, okay, well, this was a response to these things. And we had two things. So the two central things were basic understandings where there is no neutral when it comes to teaching mathematics. I know I heard that a lot from Courtney Kessler and Matt Felton Kessler all the time. And also I heard it from Rico Gutstein. But this idea of there's no neutral math teacher, right? So when it comes to the teaching of mathematics. And then two, mathematics teacher educators need to do something, right? Need to do something and need to like do something towards action. And that's where we rather than sitting back and saying, well, I don't know, I'm too timid, but like, how do we prod or probe or say, hey, maybe there's some things in here. If you don't know what to do, there could be some things in here that might lead you to do something. And I don't know, like that was getting to that point of like, hey, what's the point of this piece? And what's the point of this work? And what's the message we want to send? It took a while to get to that. And again, it's trying not to be like pushy, but at the same time, it's like, but we do need to do something. Like you can't be passive, right?
Well, I think that idea of just do something was super important. And we even talk about, and we presented on the idea of like this critical grace of when you're working in a more critical stance, sometimes there might be room for misstep. There might be a time that you may say something that doesn't quite come out right or comes out a little sideways. But as a teacher educator who's trying to take a critical stance, the big idea is you've got to take a stance. You've got to move forward. You've got to do something. And that was the large lesson for me, because I can be timid sometimes in a critical arena, and maybe fearful of doing something or saying something wrong. But at the end of the day, the work that we've done has shown us as math teacher educators is there's not a neutral, and you do have to take a stance, and you do have to take steps forward to do what you believe in your heart is right and best for those future teachers.
And I think, and this goes back to a little bit of our conversation earlier, the importance of having colleagues, or feeling like you have a community of folks that you can talk to, that you can work with, because I think it's much harder to do this work in isolation. So the fact that we could all, we contributed the ideas, and then we were able to enact them and then come back together and reflect sort of both individually and then collectively about how it went. Felt like, I think had it just been me, I'm not sure what I would have done, right? Like, would I have spent the time creating this module? It's, did I have the time to just create a module like this? The article would have taken 30 years instead of 10 probably, but yeah. So I think that, maybe that's, I'm jumping ahead to sort of lessons learned, but really, again, like, collaborating, find folks who want to have conversations and who are willing to do something, is really important.
Don't apologize. That's what podcasters call a transition. That's great.
Good transition.
Bam. There you go.
There it is. So yeah, let's talk about, so I could think of a number of lessons that we learned, and we captured some of them in the piece, and maybe some of them are not in the piece, but so having that partner or community, we kind of talk about that in the piece, like as something like, hey, here's messages for math teacher educators and I would 100% underline, highlight, bam it, whatever. Because yeah, like I'm timid at times. And like, especially man, if we ever do like there's activities about doing privilege, non-privilege sort of spaces. Like if you look at privilege, I'm there. I'm in that privilege column, like, and trying to step into this work and trying to do it well, but also too thinking about, well, I am stepping in with all that baggage with me. And so thinking like, okay, so again, how do I do that well? And how do I, communicate with others, and around doing it? And so like, you can't do that without a community, right? You can't do that without somebody that's willing to say some things that maybe you don't want to hear, or say some things that like, hey, have you thought about that? What you're trying to put out there? Or even too, just like the conversations, we had around certain tough aspects of the module. Like, how do we talk about this stuff? And so again, at our different institutions as well. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of things that I would highlight about that. When I talk to my newer doc students now, and I talk about, let's get in a community, if your ideas, your actions will be better when you have critical friends to talk about them with in order to refine them and put them out into the world. So definitely highlight that. Other learnings.
I'd written down the word community as well. It's interesting that's the word you chose to use. For me, this was a lesson in community because I was the new kid. I brought less to the table in my mind. And you guys allowed me to come alongside to not only just the writing of the paper, the work, but also in growing as a critical educator. Those conversations that we had in our weekly research meetings, like that, those are invaluable. Like there's no way to put a price tag on that and the growth that occurred from those meetings. Just to have someone I can remember, during the module itself, we would have something perplexing happen, or a kid would say something in a particular way, and we would come back and kind of debrief that together. And I remember, we could talk for hours about when we had an image that we used that didn't quite go over the way we wanted it to, and that we had to debrief that and talk about as, okay, well, what's our next step? How do we go back to the classroom and pick up where we left off rather than just avoiding that misstep? We had, these students, and Anne-Marie, I know you've talked a lot about the students that had that kind of I'll try attitude, that weren't really willing to commit to things. It would have been really easy for us to leave it there. But I think the community that we had across with the three of us, for me, encouraged me to have those hard conversations and encouraged me to have, talk about things that are uncomfortable and take it back to the class and be willing to pick up where we left off to keep growing for me.
I just want to acknowledge, Becky, that there was never a point in time where you brought less to the table. So you sort of started that
the grace that y'all have.
you brought exactly what you had and needed, and it was exactly what this project needed to the table. So I think you just remember that. Lessons learned, man. Yeah. So we talked about community. We talked about, I guess, the importance of vulnerability. And, I guess I've been teaching for a long time. I started my career as a third grade teacher, and then, kind of along the way. So you get to a point in your career where you sort of feel like I think sometimes I'm like, oh, I can do this. I know how to do this. And so what the module really did for me was it created this space of vulnerability and like humility. One, because it was new, right? So it's sometimes it can be easier to teach stuff you've taught 10, 20 times, right? But then to have to really think about the ways that I was, not doing such a good job, or really pushed me to reflect on my own practice. And so I think there were some lessons in that for me, which while they are uncomfortable, I think that's where a lot of growing happens, in that uncomfortability. And it was a good reminder to, be trying something new. Because for me, when the work of the semester gets going and you've got all of these things, it's just so much easier to do what you've always done than try something new, at least for me. So it was a good reminder of that.
Yeah. When we were capturing some of the learnings, as we did the student work, but then we also did a couple of interviews, and we came up with this thing called learning bandwidth, which we defined as the capacity for learning for the pre-service teacher, or increasing one's desire and ability to continue to develop toward being an anti-racist teacher of elementary mathematics. And so learning bandwidth, it was something like, that's something that if I focus in on that, like that's that, like being that reflective practitioner, that's like being, it's like something you take, it's a disposition that you take with you. And I can't, count how many times after, we've done this module that I've had students say, like, they saw maybe that there's potential for this idea that they wanted to make difference in the world that probably they thought might come in, like with helping kids to read, right? Like these other places, like, yeah, they knew that math was important, but it wasn't like there's things you could do to quote, Gutstein and Freire and stuff, like about reading and writing the world with mathematics. Like you could do that. And it was like, there was some eye opening, like, so some bandwidth was being expanded. So like having the language, and the kind of the thought behind activities that we do in the classroom, that could be this idea of expanding learning bandwidth. Like it was something like that they can take with them. Yeah, they might, we could learn about dividing fractions, how the best way to structure a lesson for doing that, which is all fun. Just don't say flip, multiply, and don't ask why. Don't ever say that. Actually explain it. But then, having better ways to do that is one thing, but then having this idea about learning bandwidth and leaving them wanting more with regards to learning, like that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. So I like that part of our learning from this module was this idea about learning bandwidth. I really like that.
Well, I think the idea of bandwidth was kind of partners well with the fact that it's empowering our students that, yes, we've just kind of unearthed these inequities and we've looked at how important a teacher is, but then that learning bandwidth is like, I am capable of learning more. I am capable of moving forward. And I do have this space and necessity to do better and to do more.
Yeah. All right, keep going. Anne-Marie, you got another one? So I got one if you don't.
Right off the top of you're putting me on a spot right now.
I did.
I mean,
I guess around.
That's the point of a podcast, right? But
what I was going to put out critical grace too as another thing that we started talking about, this idea of critical grace. And I've got the article in front, so I didn't just remember this stuff, but I liked our definitions here. The willingness to be, so we call it critical grace as a willingness to be an ally when there is misalignment of intent and action outcome in the action or outcome in the committed, active, and continuous pursuit of an equitable mathematics future. So we talked about this because we needed to, we talked about, doing stuff in community and needed, we would say a lot like, hey, there's some grace here. Like, oh, I can't meet because here's some grace. Or like, oh my God, folks, something happened in my life. I need to just share that. And like, we're not going to talk about writing today. All right, we'll give you with space and grace, right? And so we threw grace around a lot, but then thinking about, because we had this idea, we talked about the I'll try sort of standpoint. I think that was the counter of the I'll try. The I'll try didn't sound like it was committed. Like I'll try it. Like it probably won't work. I'll try it, but and then I'm going to go back to doing what I would normally do. Versus critical grace, like we talked about the active, committed, and continuous pursuit of an equitable mathematics future. Like you're moving forward toward this ideal. And like, yeah, you're going to make a mistake, right? And I think that's what we would see is sometimes when we'd share our work with others, because like Anne-Marie and I mentioned, we were in STAR, which is a service teaching and research in math education. So a group of people that some of them are just doing math ed research across a number of different areas. And they hear about the stuff that we're doing and be like, oh, that sounds awesome. I don't know, like I just be worried about doing it wrong, right? And so, but having this like, hey, if you're committed to it, and you're taking steps toward it, and knowing that you're going to be, you make it. But if you're in community, you might make a mistake, but then you're doing things that'll help you do it better in the future. And that's what we want. We want people to be doing, like we talked about, doing a complex instruction task, which is awesome, very structured way to do cooperative learning. And yeah, the first time, if I was having one of my student teachers here do it for the first time, it's probably not going to go well, right? But to think like if they're committed to doing it because they know that working in groups is better, right? That you're going to get a chance to see kids interacting with mathematics in ways that's impossible if you're up at the board and just, it's all a sit and get and drill and kill sort of situation. Like you're not going to have as much of an opportunity to see the brilliance of students unless you're doing stuff in groups. And so giving that commitment to doing it and knowing that, hey, we're going to give you some grace in if you didn't do it right and if you made some mistakes, and that's what I think extended to each other. And we want to make sure extend to others, like, and we detailed a very big kind of faux pas that we did within enacting the module. But, that critical grace, I think, was an important thing for us as we worked in this project.
And I think that, it's important to underscore the critical part because,
yes.
I just want to say, folks often say, well, I don't want to do it wrong. And so maybe the result is they just don't do it. Well, sometimes maybe that's better, right? Because if you're going to enact harm or perpetuate racist ideas or, yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Right. But the critical part is, no, you're going to first have to do some reflection. What do you know? Do some learning. Like it takes quite a bit of, you're going to have to put some effort into it. And before you even start thinking about teaching a module, right?
Right.
So I just want to kind of underscore that part, that the grace part isn't like this is like into like critical love and all of those things. It's not like a fluffy grace where we just say, well, you messed up and it's okay and it's fine. We're going to forgive you. But rather, right, like there's a space of grace, but it means that both people have to be committed to equity and anti-racist work. And so you've got to put in the work.
Well, and I think in the midst of writing our article, we saw firsthand some pillars in the critical education community under attack for things that were said or articles that were written. And it would be really easy to use that as a spot to back away from it or to shy away from it. And I think, again, where you said it's the critical and the grace, that it's not one or the other, it's both. And so for me, that idea of critical grace is like, we're not expecting perfection, but we are expecting forward motion. That you might misstep or you might not get it correct every time, but we still expect you to be putting in the work and moving forward. And I think that was an important lesson for me professionally from working through all of these things with you guys.
Yeah, like the book Learning to See by, is it Pamela Sita and Kendall Brown?
Kendall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like that could be a perfect play, like for someone that's like, hey, where do I start? That could be a great book to start. Or Reimagining the Math Classroom by Catherine Ye, Mark Ellis, and Carly Kane Hurtado. Like those are great places to start. A number of places to start there where you start thinking about, okay, what might this look like in practice in my math classroom? All right. So any other learnings that we have out there? We want to be respectful of people's times. Major critiques of the article?
I mean, clearly we can skip that question.
This is actually the one that kept me up last night. I was thinking about it because, like, when you put something out there, you kind of lose. I mean, and I think over and over again, we talked about this idea, or we talked about like, hey, we're not saying that this is exactly how to do it, but we're just saying this is something we did, and we want to describe it and share it, and hopefully that starts conversation. And maybe it's similar things here. And I think but as soon as you put something out there, people are like, well, is this the best thing to do? Right. But I also think too, we showed some vulnerability in what we did, because we did show our mistakes. We did put it out there and people like, hey, if you make this better, great. That's why you put it out there. Let's make it better. So, I guess that's my thing, is like, some people think like, they're saying like, this is what we should be doing in our math methods classroom. That's one thing that stands out to me.
Yeah. And I think, maybe there's an online forum where people are talking about the piece and offering up, valid critiques. But I think also, probably all of us would say, and everybody knows that has submitted a journal article, you get so much real estate, and you can only choose to include certain things, and you get feedback from a group of folks who all have varying perspectives of what should be included and what shouldn't be included. So, I think, so I just say that is what's in print takes into account all of that, but there's still so much more. And so I think having, all three of us would be open to having conversations with folks about things that we chose not to include, or that we, other things that we did and we just didn't have the space to write about it, or we were asked to, cut or whatever. But
how about you, Becky?
Well, I think, think about a game, said leave it all on the field kind of thing, right? Or leave it all on the court. I don't know that we did that. I think we put a whole lot out there, but I think there's still more to be told. So if any critique, it was, there were a few elements that I thought, oh, we should have talked a little bit about this, or I wish we'd included that. And so if anything, that just keeps me engaged in the work and willing to tell more about it later, Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure doing this work with y'all. And also too, it's kind of cool that the module, we put it out there so that if people want to go look at it, they can it's attached to the article. We'll put a link to the article in the show notes, but then also there's on the Amidon Planet, there's a link to the just the module there as well as just Google Docs. So if people want to try things out, have opinions and want to share things, just email Joel at amidonplanet.com with any any suggestions. But I do want to honor your time, but I do want to ask this question. So I want to make sure we get to it. So what is the best thing that you have learned to help you teach better? So you each are very experienced teachers. What is the best thing you have learned to help you teach better? Could be something recent, could be something that pops in your mind immediately, whatever it is. So what is the best thing you have learned to help you teach better?
You want to go first, Becky?
I can. I guess for me is that relationships matter. Relationships matter. Like, I can know all the math content in the world. I can read all of the critical literature that I can get my hands on. But at the end of the day, the relationship I have with my students matters, because if I don't have a respectful, loving, graceful relationship with my students, they don't care anything about what I have to say or what I have to present to them or share with them. And the same with our colleagues. Like, if you're going to grow as a professional, the relationships matter. Who you surround yourself with, whether they're building you up or pulling you down or encouraging you or calling you out, that as a teacher, those, vertical and horizontal relationships, they matter. So invest the time in getting to know your students, invest the time in building a rapport with those students. And then the same with colleagues. I mean, you guys have been that for me. And then I'm thankful where I work that I have a group of colleagues that help me to be better. And so relationships matter. That's probably my biggest piece. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I should have gone first because you stole mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you can just have a resounding.
No, it's all good.
Continuation.
Just rewind. No, I mean, I think, the power of relationship and community in teaching is what first came to mind for all the reasons that, you listed already. I guess another thing I'll add is just centering joy. Because I think so often this is hard work. And I think so often we get caught up in some of the stuff that is so easily sucks our joy in the classroom and the joy out of our, out of learning. And so just being reminded and reminding students that classrooms should be places and spaces of joy and love. So, and that probably goes really hand in hand with building relationships. Those things seem to work together nicely. It's not a surprise.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate
How about you, Joel?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I was thinking about this too, is when you were saying relationships, and it just tied back to the module, but also too, I just see it so much in now, because I've been here long enough that students that I had in my methods class are now the they're the clinical instructors for my current students. So it's like seeing this, and then also too, some are becoming doctoral or professors that are teaching other students. Like it's this, circle of life sort of situation, but seeing how, the investment that I made in somebody is now being an investment in not only helping me echo lessons that I'm trying to do in my methods class is also happening in the field as well. Or then also too, I'm going out to the field and seeing the awesome things that they're doing to advance the ideas that I can then bring back to my methods class. And so it's like this engaging in the community. And I think that's where education is so doing this work. And being invested and being a part of a bigger thing. You're not just, I don't know, it's hard to just place yourself and you're starting to put your tentacles out, and it's like you're rooted. Well, that's where you are. You're rooted in a place, and those rooted relationships create some beautiful things. And so, so that's another reason why this took a long time. We had to take root a little bit and had to get our roots all entwined and everything. So we're a beautiful forest, the BAM beautiful forest. That's what we are. So does anybody have anything that I didn't ask this before, anything to promote, anything that's going on? I know I just did a webinar for NCTM, the Journal Club, MTLT Journal Club. I'll just promote that because that was a fun experience. So if you haven't done the NCTM Journal Club, MTLT Journal Club, I'll put a link to it in the show notes so that you can get the future ones, because that was really fun to do. Anyway, anybody else got something? I would promote everybody watching the Milwaukee Bucks because they just got Dame Lillard. It's right.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about that.
Little Scotty love. There you go.
And then Jordan Love seems to be doing well. Hey, how about that? There we go.
Tonight, let's go.
Let's go. All right, Becky, anything for your side?
No, not that I can think of right now.
All right.
I mean, we could just keep going with sports. We could. Notre Dame women's basketball. What else?
That's right. Yeah, Notre Dame basketball in Paris. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Watch out.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, both of you. I love you both. Thank you. This has been a blast to do this, be a part of this, and then also just to tell the story, share the story, because I think stories are important to share, and that's what we're trying to do here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Much love right back to both of you.
Yes, all the love.
Okay, there it is. I almost get a little emotional thinking about this again. These are it is a long time working on this thing, and a lot of idea sharing with those two. And so the fact that we get to talk about this thing that's been put out into the world, and then we get to see how do people react to it, which is great. And again, that's also a reason why I like to share stuff on this podcast, put things out in the world, see what people react to it. And so excited for that. One thing that I did want to mention, this idea of Becky, towards the end, we talked about this idea of strategy and stance. And I think that was something that I didn't want to just cruise over, but the idea of strategy and stance was something that was kind of maybe more, and maybe something we might even like Becky said, maybe you want to dive into a little bit more. But this idea of, and it's kind of coincides with this piece of find your entry point, right? And then, because maybe your stance is like, you might be in that non-racist sort of thing. Like, I'm going in, I'm trying not to do any harm, right? I'm just going through the world versus like trying to actively do something against racist structures and policies that exist within the world, right? And so what are we trying to do? And so, maybe taking a step is reading a book, right? And so now your stance, so maybe like by listening to this podcast episode or by reading the article or by, interacting with a colleague, like your stance changes a little bit. Like, I see some inequities. I noticed like the who's in the remedial math classroom and who's in the AP classroom, like they're not the same. The demographics in each of those classrooms is not the same. I'm noticing some things, and like, what's going on there? So like you're seeing something wrong, right? So your stance changes, and you're like, hey, something needs to be done. So now you need strategies, right? Strategies to go about changing it. So maybe that involves, and so how do you stance has changed, right, is advanced, but your strategies haven't. So you have to do some reading, do some investigation, talk to colleagues to advance your strategies. And maybe you get to the point where your strategies, you've got some really good strategies, but you don't actually know like all the good things you are doing. And then someone knows that, hey, do you know you're doing X, Y, and Z? Do you know that? Like, that's really good stuff. And like, maybe they give you something else that like advances your stance a little bit more, like your criticalness, right? And like, so, and then back and forth between strategy and stance. So you get more and more. And I think that's where maybe some of the conflict is around people that maybe are fearful for stepping into a space. And this is why we talk about the need for critical grace, is that they're afraid of doing something wrong, right? They're afraid of doing something wrong. And then sometimes people that are more advanced in both their strategy and stance then might say, hey, you're doing this wrong. Like, versus like, okay, how do we offer critical grace to say, yeah, and we put a description of the story in the article where we're using a problematic picture about equity and equality, right? There's a problematic picture about equity and equality. Go ahead and look at the article, but basically it's the picture of kids on boxes where if everyone gets the same box and there's kids at different heights and like they can't look over a fence to look at a baseball game, like, the kid that's, can't see over the fence, still can't see over the fence. The kids that could already see over the fence can see way over the fence. So it's like, that's equality, is giving everyone the same box versus like giving everyone the box that they need in order to see over the fence. That's equity, right? And that's a powerful picture. And that was a very powerful picture for people to understand the difference between equity and equality. Because sometimes for people that are low on the strategy and stance, they might just equate those as similar, as the same. And they're not. They're not the same, right? And so that picture gives them an aha, like, oh, they are different. So I just advanced my stance. So now I maybe have, okay, so how do I do things differently? Rather than just giving everyone the same thing, how do I give people what they need in order to succeed? High expectations, strong support. That's what equity principles for NCTM. Now, like we say in the article, we got exposed to it was a Facebook post or some other post where people pointed out the problems of that exact picture. And we all saw it and we're like, oh gosh, yeah, that there are some problems with that picture because it simplifies it, right? It simplifies it, and then it doesn't look at structural inequity or institutional racism, like all sorts of different ways that you could look at that picture and critique it. And so rather than completely discarding it, we said, hey, we could still use it, advance people in their strategy and stance, but then now that they're advanced, let's go back and critique it, okay? So now that we're advanced, we can go back and say, yeah, that picture got you to a certain point. Now let's look at it and go even further, because now we can look at it, well, what does that say about equity, right? Like we're saying that there's something deficient with a student, right? That they can't see over the fence, right? Like, what is it saying about things? And so like we can go back and just totally critique it. And so saying like, don't just throw it out, use it to advance, but now use it to advance even further by critiquing it. Okay. And so this idea of strategy and stance and moving back and forth, and that almost like we talk about like a learning trajectory, a learning learning trajectory that you could have for advancing in your strategy and stances. And some people are further ahead than others. And so, again, thinking about how do we create spaces for people to enter into the space so they can advance in their strategy and stance without being, totally ripped apart for trying something. Now, again, Anne-Marie said it great within the episode, like, hey, we're just not talking about people going willy-nilly and just doing stuff and causing harm. People can cause harm, right? Like I taught with a curriculum that was a pretty good progressive curriculum, but there was research that said if people do this wrong, you could cause harm, right? And so to make sure that people have training to go along with it. So yeah, that's like what we want to do, always be learning, right? That's why we have the podcast, right? Learning how to teach better. We're still learning. We're always learning. And so, I don't know. I kind of agree with Becky that there's something there with that strategy and stance, and maybe there'll be more on that in the future. So, all right, that's enough. This episode's getting long, but it's episode 98, folks. 98. Dang. Awesome. I'm so glad I got to share that. But so glad you got to hear Anne-Marie and Becky. Thanks for listening, right? So that's going to do it for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes, again, the show notes are going to be pretty important. Might have links to STAR if you're interested in STAR, learning more about STAR, fundraise, you want to give some money to STAR. If you're an early math teacher educator and want to see if you could join STAR, hey, I'll put the link in there so you can learn more about this service teaching and research in math education group offered through AMTE. So those links will be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 98. Again, also too, there will be a link to once that episode comes out from the Math Teacher Educator podcast that's strictly about this article. Again, if you want to stack it, that's a great twofer. Do this one and then that one, or go vice versa if you get wild. All right. So we'll put both those episodes, put that link to that episode there once it comes out, and also the link to the module within the article. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, you can submit a question, comment, or suggestion in the mailbag by sending an email to joel@amazonplanet.com. You can also subscribe, rate, and review, and share the episode, which will allow more people looking for similar content to find it. People are doing that. I don't know. We're having some of our best months ever in people listening, so do what you're doing. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You know what? And I'm on the socials at Amazon Planet, so you can find me there. Thank you for spending time on Amazon Planet. Thanks to Anne-Marie and Becky for sharing their time, expertise, and friendship. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you have given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.